Hello, everyone. It's 1 p.m., so we are ready to get started. My name is Mariella Mecozzi, and I lead pre-professional services in the University Career Center. And I'm delighted to partner once again with my colleagues in the International Center for this Navigating the U.S. Job Search Program for international students. We will rest assured that we are recording this program, and we will share the recording afterwards. Please give us a couple of days to clean it up and make it available. You will be able to see it, access the recording and the slides from either the Career Center website or the International Center website. We are going to have different portions to this program, as you will learn in a minute. We will try to field most questions at the end rather than during the program, just in the interest of being able to cover all the rich content that we would like to share. And without any further ado, I'm going to leave the floor here to my colleague, Jake Colzer.
Thank you, Mariella, and hi, everyone. Thanks for attending the Navigating the U.S. Job Search for International Students event. So I want to just briefly go over the agenda for the presentation. I'm going to talk just for a little bit about an overview of the event, and then I will pass it over to Mariella, and she will talk about putting together an effective strategy. And then my colleagues at the International Center, John Prescott and Beth Hoffman-Lopez, will talk about legal and immigration issues related to a job search. So before we really get into things, I wanted to highlight a few cultural and immigration issues in job search resources. So the first is a link of common cultural barriers to the job search. And this will be helpful for you to just determine maybe different types of I guess, yeah, issues or barriers culturally that may arise. I've also included a link to an article titled How, Why, and When to Share Your Immigration Status on Job Interviews. This provides some useful tips from a former international student on advice that they have, such as focusing more on your skill set in interviews and less on, things like your citizenship or your immigration status and things like that. There's also an article about fashion and grooming tips when going through an interview. So even though, due to COVID-19, a lot of interviews have transitioned from in-person to virtual, it's still important to dress professionally, even when you have a virtual interview and things like that. There will be, different cultural related tips of, like things like maintaining eye contact might be important in the US, where it could be seen as like rude or disrespectful in your home countries. So different types of considerations like that. And then the final resource that I want to mention is called Career Boosting Strategies for International Students. So it gives useful recommendations of ways that you can boost your career prospects or make you more competitive in the job market when you're looking for jobs after graduation. So things like taking advantage of networking opportunities, pursuing different types of local opportunities for like cultural immersion, such as events that the International Center holds, different types of things like that will just make you a more competitive applicant. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight a few resources/events that are taking place on campus. So the first two resources that I want to highlight are campus units. One is the English Language Institute, and they provide academic courses For improving your English, they provide counseling and advising, and they also have events and programs like the International Center does. So they're a great resource on campus specific to improving your English language skills. And then the Sweetland Center for Writing is another unit on campus that is particularly helpful for improving your writing skills. So they are able to help with things like personal statements and resumes, and just making sure that your writing skills are at the place you want them to be at when you're applying for jobs and interviewing. And then later on this semester, next month, we have two events kind of relevant to today's topic. One is called H-1B, Temporary Worker and Specialty Occupations Basics. And then the other one is Employment-Based U.S. Permanent Residency Information. And at both of these, we will have a local immigration lawyer talk about H-1Bs and permanent residency in the U.S. And the links provided here, and I will send you the PDF to this presentation so you have access to the links, and it will also be available on the International Center's website. But the links provided at this particular one, on this particular slide, are from last year's events. And just know that in the next couple of weeks, we will update those links with the more recent links so you can register for those events. All right, well, that's all I really had to say. Thanks again for joining. And now I'm going to pass it over to Mariela.
Thank you, Jake. Give me a second here to share my screen, and we'll get started in a second. Can you please confirm you see my screen? Beautiful.
Yes.
So my charge today is to discuss with you effective ways to look for a job here in the United States. Just for the sake of introduction, I told you at the beginning that I work in the Career Center where I lead pre-professional services. You may also tell from this accent that I'm not a native Michigander. I am originally from Rome, Italy, even though I've lived now in the United States for a number of years. But just to say that I'm very sympathetic to the challenges of, living in a country that has values and norms that are not necessarily the ones that we grew up with, having to speak every day a language that is not our native tongue, et cetera, et cetera. So the first point I want to make, that job searching is so much more than just writing a resume and sending it out to as many employers as you can. And unfortunately, I think this is what a lot of students seem to do, and not just international students, US students as well. And there seems to be a lack of understanding that while that is a necessary step, there are certain steps and action that need to precede the sending out of resumes to make sure that you are knocking on the right doors, that you are knocking on enough doors, that when I say knocking on doors, that you are applying, right? And that you are just making a well-concerted, well-devised effort. And to that end, we will talk about the importance of knowing yourself and what you're looking for, understanding the US job market, employers' expectations, and cultural norms. We'll talk about how to develop appropriate job and internship search strategies and materials that work for your industry. And then, of course, the importance of executing your plan, the importance of persevering, but also the importance of having alternate plans, because we all know there's no guarantee of what may happen on the other end of our efforts. So we need to be ready for all eventualities. And one of the first things that I wanted to stress, and actually Jake already alluded to in one of his slides, is the importance of thoroughly familiarizing yourself with your visa and the employment authorization type that you have. I know that most of you can quickly say, yes, I have an F1, I have an H1B, or I have a J1 visa. But chances are that you may not quickly recall what the application timelines are, what are the modalities, both not only from your standpoint, but also the application modality or what a prospective employer should know. So you need to really know that, know when it's appropriate or not to raise those topics. And if needed, be prepared to educate potential employers to what it would mean to hire you. And also you need to understand a little bit why employers may have some hesitation in hiring international students. And let's be clear, that happens in all countries. All countries have their own labor laws that regulate who can actually work in a country. So, the US is not unique in this. You will see that for anything that I tell you, for any what that I share with you, I will also give you the how. So how to go about doing that. So first and foremost, I encourage you to refer to the wonderful website maintained by the International Center, which details all the ins and outs of various visas and work authorization. Another thing that you may want to be able, and actually as I'm doing this, let me do this just a second. I'm going to drop in the chat a link to a handout. Let's say chat, where you can, if you so choose, see some of the sites that I'm using. So for example, I was talking about the importance of educating employers to the various type of visas. I'm really appreciative of this guide put together by Interstride, and they gave us permission to use. It was last updated in October 2021, so it should be pretty current, because it's written from an employer standpoint, and it details at a very high level what the different employers' responsibilities would be, whether they're hiring someone with an F1 versus some other kind of visa. Again, it's nice because it's at a high level. It's just enough information for an employer to understand what they may get themselves into if they decide to hire an individual of international citizenship. So I already alluded to the fact that some employers may not hire international students simply because of company policies. And there are certain industries in particular, think especially things like government, defense, that just by statute are not allowed to hire international students. So there's no point in knocking on those doors. Back to the whole point about to make sure that you're applying to the right places. Also, a number of companies use internships, and in your case, what you would do for OPT, especially post-completion OPT, as a way to preview an employee to see not only what they can do, but how they would fit with their organization. And if they know from the get-go, they wouldn't be allowed to eventually sponsor you because companies' policies don't support H-1B petitions, then it helps you understand or appreciate why a company may not consider an application from international students when you think, well, but for CPT or OPT, I don't need sponsorship. But from an employer standpoint, they don't want to make the kind of investment in training and everything if they don't know that they can actually retain you. Also, depending on the circumstances, the industry, companies may have to prove that there is an equally qualified US citizen for the role that you are applying, or in case of downsizing, that they may have to terminate foreign employees before they can lay off any US citizens. So there are several pieces to this puzzle as to why it may be complicated for an organization to hire an international student. Having said that, I'm not saying that is impossible, but in case you hadn't, quite wrapped your minds around what are these practical difficulties from an employer standpoint, I wanted to make sure that we covered that. But back to my original point, we are going to take a look into 4 key steps that should make up an effective job search. And the first one is know yourself and know what you're looking for. What do I mean by it? When you're applying for a job, you're basically trying to sell yourself, you as the product, right? You buy a product because you know that it can do certain things, correct? The same way that you know that a certain product can do, A, B, and C, or that a certain brand is better than another, you need to understand what you bring to the table, how you can articulate to an employer what you can do, what your skill set is, what kind of problems you can solve, so that you can effectively market yourself. You also need to have a clear idea of the industry or industries that you are considering. And not only the industry, but also the job role or the job function that you are pursuing. And while your visa may determine or restrict maybe the type of industry or fields in which you can pursue employment, it's important to keep an open mind and to understand that there is a fundamental difference between industry and function. For example, let's say that you are pursuing an MBA and your interest is in finance. You shouldn't just limit your search to investment companies, banks, because the reality is that most organizations are going to have some sort of financial department. You see the difference between industry and role? So you shouldn't, let's say, discount any posting from General Motors just because that's, automotive and you're looking into finance, because I can guarantee you that there'll be plenty of financially related roles with General Motors, just for illustrative purposes. And we already talked about the importance of knowing your visa rule. So know yourself, know your industry, know what you can or cannot do based on your work authorization. And please, please, please start your search early, because your search will take longer than you think. Prior to the pandemic, there was plenty of data to support the notion that US students, it took US students, domestic students, anywhere between 6 and 9 months to secure a position. And given the difficulties, the additional difficulties the international students face, it's not unreasonable to assume that probably it may take you even longer than that. So don't think, I'm only a sophomore or I'm only in my 3rd year of my, PhD. The time to start taking these steps, understanding what the employment outlook for your fields are, how to develop professional networks. The time to start all of that is now. Remember when I told you I'm going to tell you not only the what, but also the how you can go about accomplishing that? So here I pulled out just a few tools that you may find helpful. For example, on the know yourself topic. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that hopefully it will take me there in a second. I'm doing Duo right now. Alrighty, so this is the page where we detail the various assessment tools that the Career Center offers. You're welcome to spend a little bit of time on the page to see what may fit your circumstances the best. But personally, I'm a big fan of the strong interest inventory because it helps you compare not necessarily your aptitudes, rather your interests with those of people that work in a certain field. And also the Clifton strengths may be a good one. If you are having trouble articulating what your strengths are, going through these assessments can help you put, words, labels on your skills, on your assets. Some of these assessments have a nominal fee associated with them because we have to send them out before we can, you can schedule an appointment with a counselor, with a coach for a debrief, but finances are an issue, scholarships are available. I just wanted to make sure that you know that these tools existed. To learn more about the industry, there are a lot of wonderful resources. I tend to use a lot ONET because it's maintained by the Department of Labor. It's super thorough. And so if, let's say, what did I talk about? The financial analyst before. If, let's say, you would like to learn more about being a financial analyst, you can see at a glance all the different titles that a financial analyst position may have in the United States, which this alone is gold in itself because it gives you more words to search for when you are serving job boards, right? And you can click on each one to dive a little deeper. You can learn about, specific tasks involved in that position, what kind of skills, and each one of these have some menus. So they're very rich with information. You can get an idea of what a typical work day or work week may consist of, what kind of things you'll have to do in that role. You can learn about what kind of educational credentials you may need for different positions, because you can be a financial analyst at different levels. You can also learn about wages and employment trends. And mind you that as big as the United States is or are, there are different, different wage ranges apply depending on whether you are in a rural or an urban area, East Coast versus Midwest versus West Coast. It gives you websites where you can look for jobs in that field, and other links that can be helpful. So you see why ONET is a great stepping stone to do some investigation on the fields in which you're interested. The University Career Center also maintains a number of career tracks. Currently we have them just for some of the fields that are mostly pursued by our students, things like consulting, data science, finance. You can join a career track through your Handshake account. And by the way, all of you, as long as you are a U of M student or an alum within 2 years from graduation, have a Handshake account. You just have to activate it if you haven't done so already. And so here below you will find instructions on how to join a career track. And joining a career track means that every other week you will receive a newsletter that shares with you articles, events, employers' events, job opportunities that may be relevant to you. For example, I maintain the health and the law track, and some of my colleagues are the manager of these other fields. Also, each track has like a guide. So let's say that you're interested in consulting. You can find some really high-level resources to get started in consulting if this is a new field for you, resources to explore consulting, or resources to launch your job or internship search. And this is true of all career tracks. And of course, you already spoke about employment authorization. Second step in putting together an effective job strategy: understand the US job market, employers' expectations, and cultural norms. What does this mean? Probably the first thing to understand is that in the United States, grades alone are not enough. You may come from a country where the top academic performers may be matched with employers that came to recruit at your university. Maybe there was some sort of placement service. There's no such a thing here in the United States. And employers tend to value academic performance as much as they do as much as they also value experiences and what we call co-curricular engagements. This could be anything from groups that you have joined, student organization, professional organizations that you may have joined, and any kind of work or life experience that makes you who you are. You need to understand what are the specific skills and traits, personal traits and characteristics that are valued in the kind of industry or for the kind of job roles that you are pursuing. So once again, that ONET that I showed you before can help you wrap your mind around what these things might be. But you also need to understand, back to the point that there's no mechanism to match students with jobs, that you have to do this. You know, people like me can give you tips on how to do it, can point you toward resources that can help you accomplish this. My colleagues in the International Center can help you understand what you can or cannot do with your visa, can advise you on the best time to apply and when to use what kind of allowance, so to speak. But in the end, success is going to depend on you, on your self-advocacy, on your initiative, on your stamina, on the amount of time that you'll be able to devote to this effort and to networking, because let's face it, no one else is going to do it for you. And finally, when I say understanding, you know, where you are and where you are conducting your job search, it's important to understand at least the fundamental rules of, you know, US business communication, professional etiquette, and all of that. I used to work for the American Embassy in Rome before I came to the States. And I remember witnessing all kinds of misunderstanding, probably because I was straddling the fence, right? I was with one foot rooted in my own country and my own upbringing, but I was working in a US environment, and you know, I understood a little better than my Italian counterparts. How can I say Americans functioned? And so things like time, you know, Italians are relaxed about times. Americans, if they said the meeting starts at 9 o'clock, they would show up at 5 minutes before, and they expect it to start right at 9, whereas the Italians would roll in 9:10, 9:15, and think that there was absolutely nothing wrong with that. You know, space is something that I often mention, because Italians have to have a really small bubble, especially as a counselor. I had to learn not to sit so close to my clients, because when I would be in my chair or we would sit down after I came to invite them to my office, I would sit way too close to them and they would go, whoa, okay? I was invading their bubble, so to speak. And I'm citing space and time just to mention a couple of things. But I'm sure that, you know, by now all of you have spent at least a semester and a half, if not more, in this country. And you know that there are plenty of moments, whether you are eating, standing in line, attending a class, where you can observe people do things differently than what you're used to. And it's important to understand what rules work here, because you know, we are playing this game here, so we need to understand how to behave accordingly. So what are some relevant resources to this end? I highlighted in yellow these competencies to be career ready. We put a lot of emphasis on these competencies in my office, because, but they're not ours. These were developed by NACE, the National Association of College Employers. We just happened to, you know, create or distill this information on this web page to help students like you better understand what employers' expectations are. So employers determine someone to be career ready when they are authors of their own self-development, when they have good communication skills, when they're capable of critical thinking, and you can go down the list here, but beyond the list, you can click on each one of them and learn more, and also see what are some sample behaviors that you can list in your resumes or during interviews, whenever it's applicable, to show that indeed you have developed the skills, you have enhanced the skills, you possess certain traits and characteristics, you have been involved in certain experiences that have helped you develop these traits. I also linked the student organization directory. Chances are that most of you already belong to at least one or two organizations. But one thing that I know about international students, you tend to gravitate toward either students from your own country or maybe from, same faith, but you don't seem to join quite as readily the professional organization associated with certain career interests, okay? And whereas if, let's say, you can see what my recent searches were there. Let's say that you were interested in, consulting. You could see at a glance all the various student organizations that have some sort of consulting focus, either at the undergraduate or graduate level. And this may be a group to check out and join, so that by going to group meetings, you can listen to speakers, you can expand your professional network, you can team up with your peers to join efforts, to exchange notes, to divide and conquer when you're trying to research employers. So campus involvement with student organization is super important. Also, beyond the focus of the student organization is also an opportunity to demonstrate your ability to work in a team, right? Or your leadership skills. So it's part of those co-curricular engagements that I was telling you about earlier when I said grades alone are not enough. You need to show that you don't just keep your nose in the books or in your lab, that in your pipettes or whatever, but that you're also getting involved on campus. Another way to get involved on campus, I'm just going to skip here a couple of entries and I'll go back to it, is to explore opportunities for on-campus employment, which is often a neglected opportunity. Now, please understand, you may not necessarily find a job that is, how can I say, the perfect stepping stone for the role that you're looking post-employment, but skills are skills. Any job in which that allows you to practice your English, to maybe develop, customer service skills, or to show your reliability and dependability, or to broaden your cross-cultural competence, and the list goes on, could be an asset in showing that, beyond classes, you have also engaged while you were here at U of M. And so don't be turned off if all you can see, or maybe right now, there's only, a job available in the U of M library system, because even there, it could be a great opportunity to augment your problem-solving skills, your research skills, your customer service skills, your communication skills, depending on what role you will have. An employer is going to look for that evidence of practiced skills. We often talk about networking, and I know that that's a word that scares students, or sometimes there is some misunderstanding around what networking is or is not. Networking is basically the effort that you make to reach out and talk to people who already work or are studying in the same fields that you are studying or you are pursuing to learn more about their own experience and their industry. Okay? I'm sure they all know LinkedIn. University of Michigan has a wonderful alumni network. One thing that I pulled out was UCAN, which is the University Career Alumni Network. The reason I like it is because it's much smaller than the U of M alumni page and the LinkedIn. So it may not be as deep as you like, but because it's so small, I mean, relatively small, just a few thousands people, we found that students are more likely to hear back if they reach out to someone. If you have a UMich account, you can join, and anytime your platform is going to look a little different from mine because I'm an administrator, but you can browse for anything that you like. Let's say that you're interested in, I'm just going to make it up, what is it? Aerospace engineering or something. You can see readily a link, a collection of people that either have worked in aerospace engineering or are studying aerospace engineering, and you can quickly look at their profile and decide if it'd be worth reaching out to them. Now, you don't reach out to these people because they're gonna give you a job, right? Chances are none of these people are in the position to hire you. But these people can tell you, if they're already working, what steps they took to get there. These people might be willing to look at your resume and provide an industry expert review to your resume, more, deeper than, let's say, a generalist like me could do. These people may alert you when an opening may become available. Or if you develop a relationship, these people may be willing to reference or help your resume bubble up to the top of the pile after you apply at their organization. You see what I mean? It's about relationships, it's developing rapport. But don't make the mistake to start from the top. I've had people approach me and say, people I never met, do you want to be my mentor? And I'm just like, who are you, right? Eventually we may get there, but we need to get to know each other. And I'm sure, and also people are busy. If someone approaches me and says, I am too interested in becoming a career counselor, would you be willing to talk with me for 15 minutes? I'm a lot more likely to say yes than someone who says, can I shadow you? Or can we set aside an hour to talk? And I'm not saying that I wouldn't do it because I'm mean. It's just that we're all busy. So the smaller you keep your ask, the more likely that you brick by brick, you will build this house, you will build this rapport. Let's see, and these are other resources if you feel like you need to improve your business English, or you feel like these are really basic resources, but the importance of understanding what are professional expectations when you're interacting with people, especially when, around event registration. I cannot tell you how many times we see 200 people, including this program, register for a program, and then half of them show up without ever canceling the registration or alerting that they're not gonna appear. That's not good professional etiquette, right? And at least this is a group setting. Even worse, when you schedule an appointment with someone and then you don't show up, that doesn't speak highly of your professionalism. Understanding how business casual is different from, interview attire, so for in-person interaction, or how to build good email messages, or how to conduct a phone conversation appropriately. So I'm not going to delve too much into these resources, but just to give you an idea of what I mean by professionalism. Behave in a way that is what a US employer would expect you or any applicant to behave at their best. Okay, number 3, develop the appropriate materials and approaches. Remember when at the beginning I said job searching is so much more than coming up with a resume and then sending the same resumes to millions of people. You may get lucky and something may come out of that, but chances are that unless you are a lot more deliberate and intentional about how you craft your resume, how you target it to your industry, and sometimes even to the job that you are pursuing, unless you do that, you are not maximizing your chances for success. Same thing applies to cover letters. Again, you might be able to massage, to use the template of a cover letter that you're sending to most people, most organizations that you're applying to. But if you don't go the extra step to tailor that cover letter to that particular organization, basically, why are you knocking on that door? Why are you interested in them? Why you are a good fit? What specific problems you can help solve? Again, your candidacy may not go through. Also, and I'll talk about this later in a second, but you need to understand how applicant tracking systems work, because that's what most Fortune 500 companies use and a lot of other employers. We talked about the importance of developing a professional community through your student organization involvement, to professional membership, through your work experiences, through your professors, mentors. It will also be very important to stay organized. If you do this right, you should have, whether it's a spreadsheet, a folder, a card folder, whatever works for you, you need to keep track of any resume that you send out, when you do it, when you're expected to hear back, and any kind of, if you do any follow-up, when you do the follow-up, because you never know when someone can contact you. And if you have sent out, 35 resumes, good luck remembering immediately which one it is. You need to be able to put your hands right away on which opportunity that one is, when did you apply, what they already know about you, right? And take it from there. Also, if you applied and 2 or 3 weeks later nothing has happened, you write yourself a note that it's time to circle back and maybe send a little nudge. This is what I mean by the importance of staying organized. And then you want to build a list of employers. We will see in a second how you go about doing that. But you need to know, some of the employers will be the result of seeing a job posting and applying there. But there may be other employers that are not necessarily posting at this time, but because of the industry that they're in, or their location, or what you learn about them, that you would like to pursue. And so you would actively pursue them in a different way that you would do by, responding to an ad or applying through a job posting. But it will still be important to reach out to. And then a crucial part of your preparation will be to get ready for your interviews. Unfortunately, interviews is something that may be challenging for some students, especially international students, because we are not used to talk about ourselves, or maybe our culture is such that it doesn't come natural to us to toot our own horn, to talk about our accomplishments, or to even use the I pronoun versus the we when we are describing projects and our merits and accomplishments. And we'll have to understand what are the different interviewing modalities out there depending on the industries. There are some distinct differences between behavioral interviews versus case interviews versus technical interviews. You need to prepare differently, whether you are interviewing in person versus virtually. And so you need to practice. And let's talk about how you go about doing that. So I keep a lot of resources on the International Student resource page on the University Career Center. You may want to bookmark this page, but depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you can see that there are a lot of articles, resources, tools that can support your efforts, whether it's about resumes, cover letters, networking, interviews, volunteering, some tips for, looking for opportunities during COVID, that type of thing. If you need assistance with your application materials, there are either appointments or labs that you can join, and you can do so through Handshake. All appointments in our office are scheduled through Handshake. And one thing that I failed to mention at the beginning, and apologies for this, the careers, we have been functioning in such a virtual world that we sometimes forget where our physical space is. You can tell today I'm working remotely, I'm in my daughter's room, but tomorrow I'll be, in the office, in the Career Center. And that office is located on the 3rd floor of the Student Activities Building. So we are in the same building of where the International Center is located. The International Center is on the main floor, we are on the 3rd floor. But regardless, all appointments are scheduled not through us individually, but through Handshake and a platform where you can see each coach availability. I also highlighted, I pulled out a few tools. I couldn't, cover everything. But for those of you who are undergraduate students, VMOC is a great tool to get some instant feedback on your resume. And another tool that I like, and this applies to undergraduate as well as graduate student, is Targeted Resume, because it lets you upload your resume, it lets you upload the job description for the position that you're applying for, and it provides some tips on how to make your resume more relevant, effective to that job that you're applying for. And let's be clear here, I'm not talking about fabricating experiences that you don't have, but rather how to showcase, how to use certain keywords to make sure that whoever is reviewing your resumes sees certain things. And sometimes even before your resume can reach human eyes, most likely they're gonna go through some sort of screening system, what we call applicant tracking system. And if you do nothing else, I encourage you to view this 3-minute video that we have on the Career Center website, simply because it's a,
Did you know
oops,
that over
I'm gonna stop
98%
this for a second, because it gives you at least a very high level overview of the things that you need to be careful with, from formatting to graphics and all the things that can cause your resume from being kicked out, from being screened out, even before it gets to a living and breathing person, is some great advice to keep in the back of your mind. And of course, organizations use these systems because they receive thousands of applications for one or a handful of positions. So it's almost like a funnel effect. They need to screen out all the resumes that for a reason or another seem not to be too pertinent. And then they'll only do a closer review for the resumes that survived the screening. Okay, other resources to be aware of. Lettersmith is a great tool if you need help putting together your correspondence, writing emails, writing cover letters. And again, all you need is your Umish account to access these resources. I'm a huge fan of Big Interview. Please bookmark this for your interview preparation. Again, all you need is your UMISH account to log in. If you need a lot of help with your interview preparation, there are a lot of learning modules, you see, that you can follow. But if you have an interview tomorrow, you need something quick, look under the practice tab, right? And by industry or by competency or skill set, you can pick, whatever industry is relevant to you. I don't know, biotech. In this case, is biomedical engineering. And you have an opportunity to practice with a virtual counterpart, record yourself and get some, watch yourself so you can be the first person to, provide some feedback or learn how to do things better. And then view some tips on how to improve your answers. Apologies for moving so quickly, but we have so many good things to talk about. And also, I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues, John and Beth, for the second part of the program. But I hope you're getting a feel for where I'm going with this. There are plenty of tools and resources out there to support your efforts as long as you take the time to use them. You can schedule a one-on-one interview appointment practice in my office, the University Career Center, or in your school or college. And actually, especially for the graduate students here in the group in various school and colleges, I highly recommend tapping your career services because the coaches there are more familiar with the industries, the employers relevant to their students. We in the Career Center, we serve students across all schools and colleges, but we tend to know a little bit about a lot of things. But for certain things, you really need to tap your own school or college career services. And finally, back to the original point, no one is going to do this for you. You need to not only make your plans, know yourself, assess, do your research, develop materials, then you need to find time in your schedule to execute your search. Because if you're going to wait to have time, big chunks of time to do this, you're never going to get there. You need to handle your internship or job search almost like you would handle a class or a job, where you block time, a standing time in your calendar, in your schedule, and no matter what, you devote time. So you have mini goals for each session. Okay, I'm going to research at least 2 employers or 3 employers and at least submit 1 more resume at the end of this, time block. You need to leveraging your networks is something that should be an ongoing basis. It's not something that you do at the beginning and then you stop, because you need to nurture those relationships. And especially if you find that your efforts are not crowned by success, you may want to tap your network again, just to check what you're doing, see if you may need to do something a little different. You need to remain flexible. Again, there may be some boundaries to what you may, or the kind of opportunities that you may or may not pursue based on your course of study and your visa status. But you may have a lot more flexibility that you're giving yourself to explore job roles and responsibilities. So don't be so narrow in your approach that you're shutting the door to opportunities. And take time preventively to learn what are appropriate salary ranges, what are appropriate salary negotiations, and when I say appropriate, for where you are at in the United States, so that when the time comes, you're not caught by surprise. But also, you owe it to yourself to make parallel plans in your home country or in a third country or more globally, because you need to have a plan no matter what the outcome is. No matter how much you like to remain in the United States, sometimes remaining in the United States may be a curvy a curvy road, a winding road that may see you going through different opportunities before you can come back here, or sometimes for a door that doesn't open, there are others that open on something that you hadn't considered, but that turns out to be a beautiful opportunity. So really quickly, we talked about the importance of networks like UCAN or LinkedIn to develop your list of contacts, to develop your network. I particularly like my visa jobs to look at the top 100 organizations that sponsor H-1B visa. International Student Com is also another good resource. And so that place is a good place to start to build your list of target employers. But then depending on the research that you do in your industry, in your field, you may want to add names to that list. Going global, you can access that through the U of M library system just with your UMISH account, and is a wonderful platform for opportunities not only in the United States but more globally, especially if you're looking for jobs in other countries. The country guides are great resources for you in addition even to the job boards. And then you have some, I linked some articles on negotiation. Glassdoor is great to compare salaries. And I also keep some resources on the page that I referenced before for global opportunities, especially when it comes to job boards that might be particularly beneficial depending on, you have to scroll all the way down. Various resources, either by country, by field, that you may wanna tap. So briefly, a good job search is put together when you know yourself enough to be able to articulate to a third party what you bring to the table, what you are looking for, and why you'd be an asset. When you understand your visa and you can easily articulate to a potential employer and in the simplest way possible what your responsibilities and their responsibilities are, if any, to preempt any hesitations that they may have. You need to understand the current employment outlook for your industry so that you don't have unrealistic expectations. You need to understand the cultural norms so that you don't have cultural faux pas, so that you can act expertly and navigate these waters expertly. You need to develop application materials that are specific to your field, and you need to execute, persevere, but also have alternate plans as well, so that no matter what happens, you're gonna land on your feet on the other end. And I believe I'm at the end of my scheduled remarks, so to speak. Let me take a quick look at the chat. If there's anything that I need to address briefly. Yes, we will have recordings, and yes, we will have websites. I believe that's it. John, I believe you're next.
Thank you so much, Mariella, and thank you to everyone who has taken time out of your schedule, and much appreciate the effort and time for stepping out of your kind of day-to-day classwork and other responsibilities. And Mariella's concepts and tips are so good. We in the International Center also, we want to start by communicating our recognition that navigating this process is not easy, and our appreciation for your resourcefulness and your patience. We're here in the International Center to be the immigration experts. Mariella and her colleagues across the university who work as career advisors, really are the ones who have all of the detailed level expertise on building your professional network and finding the right job opportunities, building your network and all of the things that she discussed. And then my role and my colleagues as an international student advisor in the International Center is to help give you a sense of what you can do from an immigration side of things with your F1 or J1 status, and what you need to know about what you are allowed to do and can do in the process of working in the States, as well as other topics related to immigration, travel, enrollment, questions, things of that nature. So today's focus, of course, is on employment and career development. The majority of what I'm going to discuss for the next 15 minutes are focused primarily on post-graduation employment, but I want to start with just a minute or two to verify you do have a number of employment options available to you prior to completing your course of study. Probably many of you already know this, but you can work on campus as a benefit of holding an active, valid F or J student status. Do any of you know how many hours per week you're allowed to work on campus? Maybe use the chat if someone has, yep, 20, exactly. 20 hours per week on campus employment is sort of a built-in benefit of F1 or J1 student status. J1 students do have to fill out a form to just have that on-campus employment for J1 students sort of formally authorized. F1 students, there's really no paperwork with the International Center associated with that. You can work full-time on campus during semester breaks, or if it's what's called a vacation term, like most programs in the spring summer period don't require enrollment. So there's a possibility of working full-time on campus during the spring summer. Anything off campus for an F or J student is going to need authorization in advance. And for F1 students, primarily we're talking before graduation, primarily internships, off-campus work would be done using CPT, curricular practical training. OPT, which we're going to take a deeper dive into in a minute, is used by F1 students after graduation. Really, technically, there is something called pre-completion OPT. It's super rare, and usually students would look at CPT instead as their way to work off campus before graduating. For J1 students, there's a concept or a structure called academic training, and that would be off-campus employment or internships, actually both prior to course completion and graduation and also after graduation. By the way, all of these different buckets on campus, CPT, OPT, academic training for J1, all of these have their own pages on our website, and that's where we would ask you to start your investigation into the more fine-grained level detail of these different topics. But I just wanted to start my comments today by, first of all, thanking you for joining, and secondly, to say, get some work experience before graduating. Add it to your resume, get a social security number, have the opportunity to further develop your professional network through employment before graduation. And then we can go to the next slide, which is sort of getting started with concepts after graduation. Again, for F1 students, we're really focused on OPT. For J1 students, academic training. So the next slide is going to briefly touch on academic training. We can go ahead and skip to the next slide. The majority of our international students on campus have an F1 status. F1 is certainly the most common category. My guess is the majority of students in attendance right now are F1. But we do have a small group of J1 students. It is a different immigration category that in certain specialized situations someone may qualify for. So in terms of J1 employment off campus, either before or after graduation, this is called academic training. Just a few comments. It does have to be directly related to a student's major field of study. That's an important detail. So academic training only exists in so much as it's connected directly to the major. There are limitations in terms of the total amount. The amount cannot exceed the time needed during the course of study itself. So if it's an 8-month program, if you're enrolled for 8 months, it's not possible to have more than 8 months of academic training. The length available may vary depending on the degree level and the major. Visit our website for more information if you're a J1 student and want to learn more about academic training. But most of what I'm going to focus on, because it is the majority of our students, is F1. So let's take a look at some of the OPT information. So OPT is, we love acronyms, so apologize, I'm just flowing with academic training, AT, CPT, OPT, acknowledge. OPT is F1 student employment, typically directly following the completion of study. All employment done using OPT has to be directly related to your major field of study. No matter what academic major someone has, if you apply for OPT at the end of your final term, you'll be requesting a 12-month authorization. 12-month is the standard duration of post-completion OPT. Post-completion OPT is the name for that first OPT authorization following your course completion. Now, some students may qualify to add more time to the end, to go beyond 12 months and add additional time. The two different sort of buckets for that, there's something called a cap gap extension if you're sponsored for H-1B, and something called a 24-month STEM extension, which we'll talk about in a minute. Generally speaking, the application process flows by first visiting the International Center website. We have a step-by-step guide on the procedures for applying for OPT. And we also have an online training through the Canvas system. You'll gather various documents and request that the International Center update your I-20 form. That update is our opportunity to officially sort of support or recommend your OPT application. But importantly, it's critical to say, we in the International Center are not actually approving OPT. We're just helping students apply for it, making sure you qualify for it, creating a new I-20 for it. But the actual application filing and submission is with the US government directly. So if any of you have already done CPT, the internship experience during your program, this is an important distinction. CPT is all done in the International Center, takes a couple of weeks and it's done. OPT, we're guiding you, creating a new I-20, but the filing is by yourself on your own behalf with the US government. Expect that they would require typically around a 3-month processing time. So absolutely make sure you plan ahead for that when you're reaching the final few weeks or months of your degree program. There's an application cost involved as referenced on this slide, currently $410. So that's an overview. Again, our website will have really kind of even more detail level kind of step-by-step guide. What I most enjoy talking about with students every day during our drop-in advising and email and all the different ways students connect with us advisors. In terms of OPT, I really enjoyed this slide, and it's getting into some of what we call the strategy of OPT. And what I would like you to know about this is that you have two major strategy questions that will inform your OPT application strategy. The first question is, when will you file your application? And for post-completion OPT, your window to apply opens 90 days before your I-20 completion date or 60 days after your I-20 completion date. So you have a 150-day window where it's possible to submit the OPT application, post-completion OPT. Can any of you guess why I put an asterisk after the 60 days after? The reason I put an asterisk there is, yes, it is technically possible to wait until well beyond your final term of enrollment to file. But because it takes USCIS up to 3 months processing time, sometimes longer, it may not be so advisable to wait until very late after you've completed your final semester before filing. Personally, I would really almost never recommend a student wait more than 15, 20, maybe 30 days at most after their I-20 completion. So, the takeaway here hopefully is that advanced planning is important, and you're eligible to apply and file with USCIS as early as 90 days before your completion. For those of you finishing in a winter term, let's just say for illustration purpose this semester, the I-20 end date for winter completion is April 30. And so for an April 30 completion, you can file the OPT application, post-completion OPT, as early as the first week of February, just to give you a sense of how that would work. You do not need a job offer to apply for OPT. And in fact, even if you already have a job offer, it really doesn't impact any part of the paperwork of filing for OPT. There's no place you're asked when applying for post-completion OPT, a name of an employer, any employer information. The other strategic question is, on the application, what requested dates of OPT will I ask for? You can request as early as 1 day after the completion date, excuse me. So for an April 30 I-20 completion, you can ask, I want my 12 months to start May 1st. That's the earliest possible. Or you could ask for it to start as late as possible, would be June 29, 59 days, or anywhere in between. Why does this matter? Well, this matters because when an OPT application is approved, the document that's issued and the document that actually confirms and proves your approval is called an EAD card, an employment authorization card, and it has a specific start date and a specific end date. When printing that card, USCIS will check and see what requested dates did the student use. And if you ask for June 29, but it's approved in May, they're going to put June 29. And that means if you ask for June 29, you cannot work in the US until you reach that date. which, let's say you have a job offer that starts in July or in August, that makes total sense. You don't need OPT to start in May if you're not actually going to be working until later. However, if you had an earlier job offer to start in May, obviously you're not going to want to request an OPT in June. There are up to 90 days of unemployment time available during post-completion OPT, up to 90 days of unemployment time available during post-completion OPT. So if you don't yet have a job offer, that's fine. You can still apply for OPT, but maybe you'll apply for OPT without requesting the earliest possible completion start date, like May 1st. Maybe you'll pick a later date because you could use some extra time between the end of your final term and the start of your OPT to continue your job search. So different ways of approaching these questions, and this is very much something that you'd be welcome to after reading our website and taking the online training. You'd be welcome to connect with an advisor directly to discuss your individual situation and what strategy makes the most sense. We can go ahead. Yep, perfect. I referred to the 24-month STEM extension earlier. So if you apply for and you're approved for 12 months of post-completion OPT, you find employment which is directly related to your major. You report your employment information to the International Center, complying with the F1 regulations, and you maintain a valid F1 status throughout the post-completion OPT period. You may qualify to apply for a 24-month extension of OPT, which would result in 36 total months of OPT. Eligibility first is based on, have you graduated from a science, technology, engineering, or mathematics degree, which is on the official Department of Homeland Security list of STEM OPT qualifying majors. The link to the list is on this slide, and you'll want to compare it's called a CIP code, CIP code. It's a numerical code. It's printed on page 1 of your I-20. You'll want to compare that number with the official list of STEM OPT eligible majors. Okay, that's just one part of qualifying for STEM OPT. Additionally, you'll need to make sure you're working with a company that's enrolled in something called E-Verify. E-Verify is not something that all companies or all employers are enrolled in. It's something that you'll have to check directly with your employer. If they are not enrolled in E-Verify, you're not eligible to use that work to apply for STEM OPT. Again, all of the details of eligibility are on our website. For example, there's something called an I-983 form referenced here, which is another important piece of the puzzle. Another thing to say that I haven't mentioned is if you qualify, the timing of applying for STEM OPT would be the final 90 days of your first post-completion OPT, the final 90 days of your first 12 months. That's the time frame to apply for STEM OPT. But if you think you may qualify, if you think that you have a STEM major, this is a valuable tool in your toolkit and something that I would really encourage you to educate yourself about. Next slide, please. Yeah, perfect. So that kind of represents the transition point. Hopefully, I know this has been brief, but our resources, our website, I'm going to use the chat in a second after I pass it over to my colleague Beth. If you need to connect with an international student advisor such as me, we have a variety of mechanisms for you to do so. Start with our website, do a deep dive into our online resources, but to consult with us directly about your situation, you can email us, you can call us, and we also have appointments, and we have drop-in advising, which is offered every weekday for 2 hours. We do it remotely. Nothing's in person. It's done via Zoom. So very convenient, accessible from wherever you are. So do join us if you have specific questions about your situation, and appreciate your time and the opportunity to join. I'll pass it out over now to Beth.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we just wanted to also give you a little overview of work authorization after OPT if you find a position in the US, and if your employer would like to sponsor you, the most commonly used option is the H-1B. Now, the H-1B is for a temporary worker in a specialized occupation. So what do we mean by temporary? Well, in general, that means that it's good for up to 6 years, and it can be taken in no more than 3-year increments at a time. In addition, the job itself must be considered a specialty occupation. For a position to be considered a specialty one, it must require at least a bachelor's degree or higher in a specialized field. Now, you in turn must have the corresponding academic requirements that match that position. You can always have a higher degree, but you must have your field of study must match that of the requirements of the position. Unlike the OPT, in which you are the one who is putting forth the application, this is an employer-sponsored visa category, so it is the employer that applies for the H-1B on your behalf. Now, many large firms and universities, for example, will have in-house either attorneys or specialists that file that paperwork on their behalf. For smaller employers, they may not have that, so then they would have to retain an outside attorney to file the paperwork for them. Now, the H-1B is employer and job specific. So obviously it's the employer that's applying for this visa category on your behalf. They list the position on the application. It can be for full or part-time employment. Obviously, you can only work for the employer that is filing on your behalf, but you can also hold concurrent H-1Bs, meaning that 2 employers, if you have positions that are both part-time, for example, 2 employers can apply for an H-1B on your behalf for those 2 positions. So you can have concurrent H-1B employment. Now, the H-1B goes through several government agencies. It goes through the U.S. Department of Labor and the USCIS, the Citizenship and Immigration Services. Now, when one is doing the H-1B, we put up a kind of a flow chart here so you can sort of see the application procedure. Once a case is initiated and you provide all your documents to the employer. So if you're on OPT, they will ask for copies of your work authorization card. They will ask for copies of all your I-20s, a copy of your passport, visa stamp, I-94, and academic credentials. It's very important that you have the degree required for the position at the time of filing. Once they have all that information, the employer must work with the U.S. Department of Labor to determine what the prevailing wage is for that position. So the prevailing wage is the average wage for that position in the geographic area where the job is located. So they must get a prevailing wage and also look at actual wages. The employer must look at other similarly employed individuals in that location in their company and make sure that you are being paid at least the prevailing or actual wage, whichever is higher. They can always go above that, but there is that sort of minimum level that they must be paying and attest that information to the USCIS. And also show that there are no strikes or lockouts at the job site. Once the employer gets the prevailing and actual wage, they must file a labor certificate with the U.S. Department of Labor. When it is filed, it is an online filing. It takes about a week to get that certified, and then they can send that along to the USCIS along with the I-129 petition and copies of all your documents. Once a case is filed, it takes, as you can see on the chart, 2 weeks to 9 months. Why such a large discrepancy? Well, 2 weeks, there is a premium processing option. So the employer can pay an additional $2,500 to guarantee an adjudication within 2 weeks, or through regular processing, we're seeing 6 to 9 months currently to process those cases. If you were at any time on a J1 and were subject to the 2-year home residency requirement, you also have to show in the filing that that requirement was waived or that you fulfilled that requirement. As far as position or employers, and you may have heard about the H-1B cap. There is a limited numerical limitation on the number of H-1Bs that are given out on a yearly basis, and that number is 65,000. Now, there are certain employers, such as institutions of higher education, certain nonprofits and government research institutes that are exempt from that. So if you were to work at the University of Michigan, for example, there is no cap or limit on the number of H-1Bs that we can request in 1 year. But if you do go to a private employer, there is that numerical limitation. Currently, for fiscal year 2023, which runs from October of 2022 to September 30th of 2023, employers are currently registering and submitting names for this year's H-1B cap. It goes through March 18th, and then a lottery is run on those names. And then employers are notified of which cases were selected. And at that time, the employers can submit the actual petition to the USCIS. So one thing we always recommend is that if you have OPT and then the option of applying for STEM OPT, to do that, because USCIS usually does get more petitions every year than they can, or more than the 65,000 every year. So not everybody will get an H-1B, and you want to be able to apply during multiple years. So if you have that work authorization and the longer you can get it for, then that's an advantage if your case is not selected in the first year. Could you go straight to H-1B from finishing your degree and skip the OPT? Yes, you can, with the caveat being that you must have completed the degree required for the position at the time of filing. So H-1Bs obviously are being input right now into the system. So you would have to have completed your degree before your name is put into the cap numbers. So OPT, and if you're eligible, STEM OPT is an advantage in this whole process to guarantee, or at least improve your chances of being selected in 1 year of the H-1B lottery. The other advantage of the H-1B is that it's what's called dual intent. You can be intending to immigrate to the US while you're on that status. So many people then go from H-1B, and if their position is of a long duration and you want to stay in the US to continue in your profession, then the employer can sponsor you for permanent residency. And we can just go to the next slide and look at that process. This is very general. We always have an attorney every year give a presentation for several hours on all the ins and outs of permanent residency. So this is just a brief overview of that process. it can be a very long process. It can take many years. So one needs to plan ahead with your employer if you're intending to do this. The one good thing is if a case is filed on your behalf before the end of your 5th year on an H-1B, then the H-1B can be extended beyond the 6th year. So it can be extended in 1 or 3-year increments, depending on where you're at in the process. So you'll always have work authorization while the permanent residency case is in process. In most cases, it is a 3-step process. The first step being labor certification, which, like the H-1B, goes through the Department of Labor. The employer has to once again verify a prevailing wage for the position. They must also run a test of the labor market. So an ad must be run to see if there are any U.S. Workers minimally qualified, willing and able to take the position. So the employer will run the test of the labor market, and if there are no minimally qualified U.S. workers who apply, then you would go to the next stage, which is filing an I-140 with the USCIS. One thing to note here is if during this labor test of the market, or if they do identify a U.S. worker who applies, who is minimally qualified, willing and able to take the position, that does not mean that you will be kicked out of your job. Because you have an H-1B, you have a temporary work authorization, and you're good to work under that. What it does mean is that the employer cannot sponsor you for permanent residency because we don't need a foreign worker to fill that position. The employer could do another test of the labor market later on, so it's not like one and done, but this test of the labor market must be done. There are certain cases where you can skip that first stage and that test of the labor market for those people who are either what's called alien of extraordinary ability or an outstanding professor and researcher. Those people can skip that first step. But of course, as the name suggests, you do have to show that your work is of outstanding nature. So things such as major prizes and awards. If you have a membership in an organization that requires outstanding achievement, not just dues paying, publications of course count, and the journals and the impact factor of those. Reviewing the work of others is important, as well as letters from experts in the field regarding the outstanding nature of your work. So those two categories will skip the first stage and go directly to the second stage, which is the I-140 form, which is filed with the USCIS. That form also could take 2 weeks up to a year to process. The 2 weeks, once again, if it is premium processed for that additional fee. Otherwise, it can take up to 12 months to be adjudicated. Once that step is completed, the final stage is the adjustment of status. So the first 2 stages really are about the employer, the job offer to you, and how you meet the requirements for the job offer. The last stage then looks at your personal background. Do you have, a criminal history or a contagious disease or some reason why we would want to exclude you from becoming a permanent resident? And that last stage can take 6 months into however long it takes. It can take up to several years. So that is why this whole process can take a while. Not to mention that last stage, the US only provides a certain number of immigrant visas per year, and they are divvied up by countries as far as there can be no more than 7% can be issued to foreign nationals from one country. So for those countries where we have a high rate of immigration, there is a backlog, and that And for example, citizens of China and India cannot file that last stage right away until they have an immigrant number become available for them. But at the same time, they can extend the H-1B work authorization while that whole process is going on. So, you know, there is that work authorization that is always there. And spouses can also apply for work authorization documents at that time. So that's very advantageous. So that's sort of a brief overview of the H-1B and the permanent residency. Once again, we have, you know, in-depth presentations by attorneys on these. So just keep an eye out for messages from the International Center for when those are taking place.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, John. This was a super valuable overview of the employment options.